You.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the National Association of Black Counselors Town Hall, where we're talking about Project 2025 and Agenda 47. Our moderator for this discussion is Angel Moss-Baker. She is the VP of the National Association of Black Counselors, and I'm going to turn it over to her. This meeting is being recorded. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if you have questions in the chat, I'll let her know that the questions are there. And it also is going to be streamed live on Facebook and on Instagram. All right. Angel, over to you.
Thank you so much. And just wanted to say hello, greetings to our audience and our panelists today. Welcome to the NABC Town Hall on Project 2025 and Agenda 47. The purpose of the Town Hall is for us to increase our awareness about these initiatives. We ask that you note that the opinions expressed during the town hall discussion, the panel discussions, do not reflect the views of the NABC, but it is a safe environment where you can, express your thoughts and feelings and acknowledge and respect the diverse viewpoints of others. The town hall panel discussions, we plan to have several of these through, I believe it is October the 8th, every Sunday at 4 p.m. with different topics for each discussion. And they are divided and there'll be 90-minute sessions. So if you have any questions or comments until we open it up to the audience, please feel free to share your thoughts and questions in the chat. So today's topic is Agenda 47 and how it may impact different marginalized communities, especially the Black community. I want to begin by introducing our panelists. We're expected to have two. I see Cory McCray, so I'm going to introduce him. Our first panelist is Cory McCray, a politician who serves as a member of the Maryland Senate for Maryland's 45th District in Northeast Baltimore City. He is known to be an energetic advocate for social justice and wears many hats in support of effective leadership and giving back to the communities in the Northeast Baltimore area. So I want to welcome everyone again and begin by asking Senator McCray this first question. Project 2025 and Agenda 47 have been hot topics of discussion with the upcoming election. Agenda 47 has been recognized as the 2024 GOP platform to make America great again. What can you share about Project 2025 and Agenda 47 on how these initiatives may impact the Black community?
Yeah, Ms. Moss-Baker, just wanted to first say that I'm just blessed, I'm honored to be able to share in this conversation, this dialogue with you today. And when I think of Agenda 47, when I think of Project 2025, I think it's important just to tell folks where I'm rooted at. I'm born and raised in the city of Baltimore. I'm a graduate of Fairmont Harford Institute, right there at Harford and 25th. I'm an electrician that went through a 5-year apprenticeship program with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And I tell folks, by the grace of God, I was able to find, I had a mother that didn't give up on her son, but was able to find that apprenticeship program that I just talked about. Small business owner, been purchasing homes up and down the Bel Air Road corridor for the past 20 plus years, since I was 20 years of age. And I got my training wheels in the House of Delegates, and I'm currently serving in my second term in the Maryland State Senate. And when I think of this Project 2025, Agenda 47, one thing that it can teach us or make sure that we just are focused on is actually having our own agenda, making sure that we have our own short-term and long-term goals to make sure that we move our community forward. So while I may be cognizant and knowledgeable about what the right-wing agenda is or things of that nature, I also just think that it's important just to say, hey, what is the agenda for the 45th district? What is the agenda for the Baltimore City? What is the agenda for the state of Maryland? When I think of that agenda, I think about how do we create ownership? I told you all that I'm an entrepreneur. And one of the things that I think about, and I think it's important to give clear examples of what that ownership looked like, Ms. Moss Baker, but I think about Mr. Thorpe. And I think about Mr. Thorpe and legacy of excellence, Black excellence. Let me be very, very clear. Mr. Thorpe has been teaching our young Black scholars how to swim for decades. And before Mr. Thorpe was teaching young Black scholars how to swim, it was his dad actually teaching them how to swim. And when we think about that level of ownership, that level of responsibility for our community in reference to our agenda, one of the things is that most folks may not know that Mr. Thorpe was teaching folks how to swim in his backyard. And when he came and said that he was looking for a space, I couldn't understand why it was perplexing or hard for him to find that space, knowing that he represents Black excellence at his best. We found him a space right there at Walther and Northern Parkway. Right across, for folks that may be familiar, it's right there by the Family Dollar that just left us. Those apartments, there's a city-owned plot of land, couple acres, that he'll be able to continue to be able to do the great work that he's doing. But Ms. Moss Baker, we're not talking about renting a facility. We're talking about ownership. We're talking about a life skill. We're talking about blessing folks with the talents that you have and making sure that you pay it forward by teaching them the ability to swim. Then I think about our responsibility from a history standpoint. When you think about the agenda, history is very, very important. And I think about right at that school that I graduated from on Hartford and 25th, there will be the first public school football stadium built right there on Clifton Park. And I can remember when the city of Baltimore came and they said that they had a gap, Ms. Moss Baker. They said they had a gap of about $2 million. And they came to the state asking for help and assistance with that $2 million. But one of the things that I think about is that the first Black state senator for East Baltimore, many people may not know him, but his name was Senator Robert L. Dalton. This was 50 plus years ago, and he had passed away. And when you think about an agenda, our agenda should always be protecting our history and the shoulders that we stand on. So the city of Baltimore was able to get the money. They got 1.25 in the state budget just about a year and a half ago. But they had one caveat, Ms. Moss Baker, that the naming rights for that public school football stadium will be named the Senator L. Robert L. Dalton football stadium from that standpoint. So when I think about Project 2025, when I think about Agenda 47, I think about the agenda that is important and incumbent upon leaders in our state of Maryland, specifically the city of Baltimore, to have for our respective neighborhoods. And I look forward to continuing that dialogue and going deeper into the work that we're doing as we talk about with the questions that you may have. You're on mute. You have yourself muted.
Thank you for that. You do a lot and have spoken a lot about Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
What about on a national level? I know you do a lot. You've done some commendable work with the youth. How do you see these initiatives impacting our youth overall? Baltimore, DC, on a national level.
Yep. So, Ms. Moss Baker, when I think about our young scholars, I think about them having the greatest asset that we don't have at this moment, and that's time. We can get more money, we can get more clothes, we can get more opportunities, but it's the time that's so important. And when we think about our young scholars, and I got 4 of them in my house, I should be very clear about that. I got a Kennedy, Reagan, CJ, and Bryson, 17, 15, 10, and 9. So when I think about those young scholars and how they're impacted on a local, state, and a federal level, when we think about food insecurity and cutting back SNAP benefits, I think about that from a criminal justice standpoint and making sure that our young Black men, young Black women can walk out their house and feel very safe when we're talking about from a public safety standpoint. I think about this from an educational standard and knowing that some of our Title I dollars come from our federal government and making sure that those schools are very inclusive of that piece of it. When we talk about Black ownership and we talk about Black businesses, we know that with that trillion dollar budget from the federal government that is so important, not just the agencies that are facilitating the management of those dollars, but also in reference to how those dollars are appropriated from that standpoint. So I work in very much concert with our two United States senators at this time, Senator Ben Cardin, Senator Chris Van Hollen, and also my Congressman Mfume, but also hoping that we have our first Black woman, United Angela also Brooks. So I hope to be working in concert with her.
Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am.
And one of the concerns, or one of the many concerns or issues, is the promise or the proposal to shut down or close down a lot of the government agencies, such as that would affect housing and schools, closing down the education. How and based on the ideas and plans that you just discussed in the work that you're doing with others, how would you be able to, or what strategies could be implemented to combat this and see your initiatives through if the GOP has an opportunity to shut down the Department of Education, to shut down the HUD, and make these terminate a lot of the rights that we currently have.
Yep. So, Ms. Moss Baker, I think that it's important to make sure that folks have the visual of what we're talking about. So you talked about housing, and we know the challenges that we face here in the city of Baltimore with the influx and concentration of vacant housing and how that indirectly impacts neighborhoods. And I'm going to start shooting them out. Darley Park, South Clifton Park, Fort Worthington, and that level of concentration is indirectly impacting people that may be homeowners and impacting their generational wealth from that standpoint. Then we think about from an education standpoint, we will not get anything done if we do not get K through 12 right. So as I talked about the 4 young scholars in my house, I know what it takes to make sure that we raise good human beings, and an education on a global scale is what they're competing with. And we have to make sure that rigorous academic experience is there for these young scholars. When you look at Agenda 47, Project 2025, that's going in a different direction than what I'm aligned with, because I know that we have to invest in our school buildings, but not just the construction of our school buildings, but also the teachers that are working in it and the academic experience that happens from that standpoint. And then from a housing standpoint, we know that if we do not get housing right, you can't get the workforce right. The young scholars are thinking about what they're going to be doing when they get home, or if they're going to have a home, if they're couch surfing, different things of that nature. So they cannot focus on that educational experience from that standpoint. You named 2 different pieces that's not just important from a city of Baltimore level. This is if you're in any urban jurisdiction. I don't care if you're in Chicago, Cleveland, New York. These are very, very important issues, and we have to make sure that we get it right.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? Nick, did you have anything? And Dr. Winkler? You're coming in and out.
I love how you spoke about Black excellence and how we need to promote that. But under Agenda 47 and Project 2025, there is the elimination of DEI. How will we be able to continue having quote unquote Black excellence when there won't be opportunities for members of our community to move into spaces and places that will allow us to pull up other members of the community?
100% agree. So when I think about, like, let's just take laws for instance. The reason why these arbitrary barriers were in front of us because our elected officials were not diverse. There was a selective group of white males that were making laws, that would have laws, and I got to give examples so that folks can understand what I'm talking about. Let's say that you did unfortunately be impacted by the penal system. Let's say that you were cutting hair for 10 or 15 years over the penal system. You know that when you came back home anywhere in the state of Maryland, unfortunately, you had an occupational license, and that occupational license restricted you from doing a profession that you were doing in the penal system for 10 or 15 years. That's a barrier right there. We removed that barrier in 2015 for the state of Maryland, but it should have never even been existent from that standpoint. Then when we think about, and I'm gonna go back to this DEI point that you're talking about. So the challenge is because the selective group of white males were making laws for all of us, not some of us, but for all of us, these products, the work product that we came up with was underwhelming, I should say. So now that we have a diverse group, and when I say diversity, I'm talking about age diversity, I'm talking about gender diversity, I'm also talking about ethnic diversity. When we have everybody at the table, we always, hands down, come up with the best product. So as they remove the DEI piece of the conversation, unfortunately, whether you're in the public sector or private sector, you're not going to get the product that everyone is deserving of, because you do not have all the voices at the table from that standpoint. And it's dominant from some selective groups that's always going to have their respective interests. I've watched Microsoft, I watched a number of private and from a public standpoint move in this direction. And when I say public, I'm thinking about like our higher educational institutions and how they're taking this out of the equation, and everybody's not being able to be lifted up, but all of us do pay taxes and contribute to these same institutions that are not taking those types of things in consideration. So I appreciate the question. It's a very critical issue, but even more important, while we get out and make sure that representatives are reflective of all of our views, not some of our views.
So you've spoken a lot about, well, first, and don't take this as offense, and I hate when people say that because you know it's about to be offensive.
Yeah.
But it is, but I'm forewarning you that it's going to be slightly offensive.
Yes, sir.
Because you've spoken very much like a politician.
Okay.
And so what we want here is, honestly, we want the gloves to come off. Like, you don't have to sugarcoat anything here, and give the political answer. I do love that you were very specific with the last answer to the question. We're like, this is the group of people that have done this.
Yep.
But when we're talking about these initiatives that are proposed and the things that we need to know about them and how we mobilize as a community to combat them, and if things do come to fruition and these people are in power, the things that we can do as a community to soften those blows. Not, giving us that political like jargon and of the, because yes, you're encouraging us to vote and all that. It sounds great. But like real deal, rubber to the road, like what are things that we need to be aware of, and what are things that we need to, as a community, be doing to protect ourselves?
Yeah. So keep in mind, I serve as a state legislator. I don't serve as a congressman, or I don't serve as a United States senator. So the only thing I can speak of is my lived experience from that standpoint. Every day that I try to wake up, I try my best to lead by example, not just for the young scholars, my wife, but also for my community as a whole. I think that we all can do that. I think that we all have that responsibility to do that. And once I make sure that I'm leading by example, I'm also making sure that I'm contributing to the nucleus and to my respective family. And that's making sure that the young scholars in my house have the tools to be successful and be good human beings. This is something that we all can do, but I'll also put it where you can get it. That makes sure that when they, not just after they come from the schoolhouse, but they're getting the tutoring that they need. So they actually, while some young scholars may go to school 9 months, mine are studying 12 months out of that year. Making sure that the recreational piece of it, they play a multitude of different things. My boys 9 and 10, they box, they basketball, they flag football, soccer, everything there. My high schoolers have drilled down to what they want to focus on, and both of them are at BPI, Baltimore Poly Institute at the moment. The JV, one plays basketball, and they're in the ingenuity program. So the academic piece is there, but that's what we want for all of our young scholars. One plays basketball, JV and varsity came in first place in their respective regions. The oldest plays tennis, first in doubles for the last 2 years. So when you say like, what could we be doing? I think that it starts at home and making sure that we get that right. But then I think about all of the stuff that we're doing outside of the home space. Like I could be doing anything that I want to do in life. I'm choosing to be the Maryland State Senator and make sure that my community is represented in the way that it was doing. I talked to you in reference to about Mr. Thorpe and 4M Swim Club that'll be coming to the district. I talked to you about the importance of history, the protection of it, but making sure that I leverage my power when I'm having conversations with my colleagues that may not always know what power looks like. Let's also talk about like, how do I engage with our young scholars? So when I came up, Mayor Smoke and the council of the president was Lawrence Bell at that time. They had a very strong presence in my school from that standpoint. And that's the same type of behavior that I try my best to emulate. So I stay in one of our schools, K through 12, on one of these institutions, these campus institutions, to make sure that first, that it's a presence. They see people that look like them in these positions and know that they are great and can do anything that they put their mind to. I had a conversation with the folks over at Achievement Academy last year, and give you an example, like, why is this important? So I have these folks, I explain to them that I'm a Maryland State Senator. Most people don't know what a Maryland State Senator is. Most couldn't tell you how many are in the state of Maryland from that standpoint. But I know that every time I walk out of a classroom that they're walking out and their mental and the education that they have on the General Assembly has been raised in the bars there. But the question that I asked them was, if you were senator for a day, what would you change about your school? They then talked about driver's ed. And I walked out of that school in amazement, thinking about the driver's ed component and how it's not even in our public schools. And these young scholars are saying what they need. Not only did we put in a bill last year, they were the ones that came down to testify. Governor Moore signed their bill May 26th, but they got to see a clear example of how their legislative process works. They were engaged in it. And inside of the state budget, going forward in perpetuity will be a $2 million appropriation for driver's ed for any public school that's 40% poverty or more, for them to be able to apply for dollars through MSDE. So I'm going to keep giving examples of things that we're doing, but like the thing that I can speak to is just my lived experience. It's not trying to speak like a politician. It's the real work that's actually happening.
Let me add that that with these initiatives, it proposes to take away your rights to be able to do the things that you have been doing with the 4 that are in your home and those that are coming up in my home and everyone else's home. They're talking about, dismantling a lot of the public education and implementing very what could be considered some drastic measures. This even includes teachers, and principals, that the state they would vote on who they want teaching their kids and what they want their kids to learn. So all the things that we have been doing to put in place our pathways for our children to be successful and have certain educational benefits and extracurriculum activities.
Yep.
Those things could be at risk based on what's written in 2025 and Agenda 47. So how do we realistically look at that, maybe, and kind of take those blinders off to see what's around us and how we as a Black community, Black educators, parents, and so forth, therapists, can work with our community to ensure that they continue to have these benefits that you have, eloquently described within what the work that you've done with your youth and those in your home.
I think it's important, while there's a big focus on Project 2025, Agenda 47, let's be clear that there's always agendas, whether you're on a local, state, or federal level, that's trying their best to be implemented, whether it's different ethnic groups, whether it's Republicans, Democrats, whoever it is from that standpoint. And I think that the most important thing that we can do is have a clear agenda of our own. How do you set these short-term and long-term goals from that standpoint? I'm going to go back and speak to some of the stuff that happened on the state level, because I think that it's equally as important as things that's happening on the national level. So everything that was important to me, I've served in office for 10 years. Anything that was major that I had contributed to was vetoed by our respective governor, Governor Hogan at the time that I was serving, and I served with for eight years. Let me tell you what some of those things look like. So when we think about voting rights, you know, prior to 2016, if you were on parole or probation, you did not have the right to vote. We led on that in the House of Delegates. So we not only passed the bill, but we had to get the override because Governor Hogan had vetoed that bill. Why would something like that be important? Something like that is important because if you take 2 zip codes in the city of Baltimore, take 21210, that's in the city of Baltimore. So that's the northern part. That's like your Guilford, your Roland Park. It was only 10 people on parole and probation in that entire zip code. Let's take a zip code that I represent, 21213. In 2015, there was 937. So when you look at the correlation of 10 versus 937, you look at the concentration of liquor stores, you look at how the failing K through 12 educational institutions, you look at the food insecurity that exists, and elected officials say they pay attention to everybody. That's not true. They pay attention to people that vote. They pay attention to concentrations of pockets that vote. Let's take the red line, how you remove $2+ billion out of the Baltimore Regional's system because you gave back $1 billion to the federal government, and $750 million of the state dollars you deployed everywhere but Baltimore City. That happened during my tenure. When minimum wage, my mom worked 2 or 3 jobs. I can remember going to school and she had already been gone to work, and I can remember coming home and having to call, and she would then come home around 7 or 8. Nobody should have to work 2 or 3 jobs to be able to sustain. But when I got in the Senate, the minimum wage was $10.10. You'll see that it's currently reflective of $15 an hour that triggered January 1st of this respective year. Public transit. My daughters catch public transit. I've caught public transit. And you look at our public transit system, it's deplorable. So when we think about transportation on a national level, it's important to keep in mind that on a local level, on a regional level, it's equally as deplorable. And it's always under different constraints. So it's always breaking down. It may not come on time. People have to catch it, not just our seniors utilize it to make sure that they can get prescription drugs, food, different things of that nature. So when we talk about Agenda 47, when we talk about Project 2025, this is happening on a local level, it's happening on a state level, and it's happening on a federal level. I'll even talk to you about something that deals with health, and then I'm gonna stop talking and get to the next question. So all my life, our liquor stores were open from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. All my life, they were open from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. But we begin to normalize the unnormal and never asked our questions. Why is our liquor stores the only one in the state? The only one in the state. Anne Arundel do not operate like that. Baltimore County, Howard County, no other jurisdiction except for Baltimore City. If you come in East Baltimore, you will find that East Baltimore, from North Avenue down to McElderry Street, down to Central Avenue, over to Luzerne, all of those liquor stores now operate 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. And why is something like that important? When the neighborhood came to me, and that was under the state's purview, that's not national government or local government that had that control. We had that ability at this moment. So when the neighborhoods right there at Milton and Biddle said, hey, we had 29 shootings right here at this one location in a 3-year period, we went to set about changing that. Was the businesses upset? Yes, they were upset because we took 7 hours that they could not operate anymore. But we then began, and let me tell you how many it was. Within a 1-mile radius, it was 23 liquor establishments. Within that footprint, that geographic boundaries, why is that much liquor in anybody's neighborhood within a 1-mile radius? These are the things that we begin to normalize. We're talking about Agenda 47, Project 2025, but I'm telling you, we have to be engaged because it's happening at a local level and a state level, and people are making dollars off of our pain, off of our stress, and off of our health challenges.
Andrea, you had a question?
Yes, good evening. My name is Andrea Mushet Seraton, and I'm a counselor. I work with clients from all different races, sex, you name it.
Mhm.
Now, I listened and you said Project 47 and Project 2025 has been implemented a long time ago or it's going on. But from my reading and from my research, it shows that the GOP president, the GOP, which is the Grand Old Party, had this Heritage Foundation has always set blueprints for a manifesto every 4 years, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So it is more radicalized now. If you check the levels, if you look at all the 40 years ago, when it was that when they always set these projects or agendas, they weren't so radicalized, but it is more radicalized now. From what I'm reading, when it is more like pushing fascism, yes, a totalitarian governance, because they're going to limit the education, they're going to militarize, call out the National Guard. They talk about in criminal liberal cities. We need to define what are the liberal cities. What is defined as the liberal cities? From my understanding, the liberal cities are the cities that have more safety nets, and fairness, which the GOP is against. Yes? So what are defined the liberal cities? And also the Project 47 is just the same as Project 2025 from my understanding. It's just that one is greater. So, but it's promoting the same things. When we talk about immigration, I'm an immigrant, yes? When the Indians and the natives were here, the Europeans came here, right? And they were given assistance. It seems like this is just a psychological to play on people's mind to get them into a fear that the immigrants are taking over. But on the line, they're pushing a greater agenda, which is a totalitarian, authoritarian governance where our freedoms will be limited. And of course, non-white people are, when you think of feudalism, they are the main focus. The peasants are the main focus to take away their rights, while the ruling party, the totalitarian government, they and their friends enjoy the freedom. That is what, if you read Project 47 and Project 2025, that's what you will get if you're being honest. If we're all being honest about expanding presidential power, that in itself is totalitarian. Yes? Mass deportation, again, get us scared that immigrants are coming to take over when they're really pushing. Let me say, I know I'm going to be, a lot of people might find this offensive, but it's white supremacy. It's a white supremacy agenda. We need to stop playing around and into this fear, as if we fear to talk about certain things and to be politically correct. But it's really white supremacy pushing an agenda to exercise their totalitarian rule. We're expanding presidential power. Why you need to do that? Yeah? Death penalty for drug dealers. National Guard in high crime liberal cities. If you examine history, the Grand Old Party had to surrender to the Union soldiers because they lost the war. They're still carrying out their tactics to rule. Yes? So if we could talk about that, and let's be real about it, it's real serious.
Yep. I think that, when you talk about radicalizing the beginning of your
Cory, before you start, so we're gonna pose that to you and Cliff, because Cliff Kumba has joined us. He's a member of the panel as well.
Great.
We haven't called him in, so you're not the one that's in the crosshairs alone on that question. So if you want Cliff to go first and then you follow up, you all can decide how y'all want to do.
That works perfect.
Okay. First of all, greetings, everybody. Apologies for being late. My computer was getting a little crazy on me earlier today. Since I did come in a little on the late side and I came in the middle of Brother McCray's talk, I just want to get kind of a little clear for myself. Okay, exactly what is the question that you want me to answer at the moment?
What Andrea just posed.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, she actually kind of said a bit of a mouthful, and as she was talking, I was just kind of writing some notes. I really wasn't planning on talking an awful lot. I was planning on doing a lot of listening today. But as she was talking about, I guess, the development of Agenda 47, Project 2025, and really, technically speaking, I guess you could say it's nothing new. I mean, this comes out of the Contract for America or Contract on America, comes out of the Freedom Caucus, the Tea Party, and all that came out of the Me generation from when Reagan came on board. And you go back to the Southern Strategy of Nixon, all those kind of right-wing things that were being pushed. And it seemed that what they were talking about before, because it was easy for them to do this in public and show their faces while they were doing it, they were couching everything in terms of the freedom to do certain things, okay? The freedom to believe a certain way and the freedom to act in a certain way. And now it looks like what they're trying to do with 2025 and 47 is move from the freedom to do things to a mandate to do things. From a freedom of religion or a freedom to pray in schools, and they don't want to make you pray in schools. A freedom to believe in whatever ideology it is that you want to believe, because maybe I guess they saw themselves as being on the outside looking in. Now that they think they got a little bit of power, now they want to make it a mandate to do that. So that, for instance, if all these little I guess they like to call it fake news articles that are coming out on Facebook right now about how athletes kneeling when the national anthem plays, and supposedly now all these little tales. The NFL expelled these players for kneeling during the national anthem, or the WNBA suspended these players from kneeling when the national anthem. Well, I would say more than likely all of that is fake news, but I think the idea is to create in people's minds this notion that, okay, now we're going to legislate against certain freedoms in the name of the very same freedoms that we were talking about before. So they're playing this little almost like George Orwellian flim flam game on us, where they attempt to start by saying, let us pray before, and now they're saying, make us pray. Freedom of speech to control of speech. And all this talk about immigration, they're completely ignoring, I guess, what you would say is a rallying cry of the immigrant community. We didn't cross the border crossed us. So they're ignoring that part of the narrative and just simply pushing what it is that they're saying. And sure, Sister Angela is correct as far as not being afraid to talk about white supremacy. Well, first of all, this is the National Association of Black Counselors. Nobody in a black anything, African anything, indigenous anything, anti-racist anything should be scared to say the words white supremacy. As far as I'm concerned, that's almost like a given. I mean, we've been talking about white supremacy for a long time, and I don't see any reason why we should be shy about that at all. So I guess the main question for me is just in terms of taking a look at this move from the right wing wanting the freedom to do certain things to now attempting to take power and control the narrative. And as she said, to essentially impose totalitarianism on us as a people. The main question in my head is just what are we going to do about it from here? I'm not sure if that's the answer you're looking for, but that's what's going through my head at the moment.
I mean, and it's interesting that you bring that point up, Cliff, because you're 100% correct, and it's the way that they're going about it. I think the reason that we've changed the language is because we're trying to appeal to a broader group of people, right? Because even when you look in our community, some of the language that they're using appeals to some members of our community, right? When you're talking about freedom and you're like, it appeals to a certain population in the community because they feel like they haven't had these things, or that you're protecting them. I mean, if we're going to become 100% real, we have to be honest and say that we as Black people are very conservative. We are conservative. We would be with the conservative movement if it wasn't for that racism piece, most of us, right? Right? Like that's the pieces like makes us go, oh wait, right? But when they start couching it in these different ways, it appeals to the conservative parts of us. When we start talking about religion, right? And putting religion back in school, but then we don't think about the fact that there is the diversity of religions. Everybody doesn't believe the same way and in the same thing, right? But we're speaking specifically about one thing. When we start talking about, you know, looking at a family and what the family structure is, and that it's supposed to be a man and a woman and the children. Well, I mean, if we want to be honest, the nuclear family participated in the destruction of the Black family, because our families have always included more than just a mom and dad and kids. Our families have always been, right, the community. But when you said that this is what it needed to be, then you've destroyed that. You've taken that from us. And so when you're defining these things and you're putting these things in place for the conservative parts of us, that appeals. And that sounds good. And I think that's why you've seen the change in the nomenclature to these things, because they're trying to appeal to a larger group of people that will, for the most part, be negatively impacted by this. Because also when you talk about immigration, we're talking about immigrants from specific countries. We're not talking about all immigrants.
Not Norway.
Right? So again, like it's going to hurt certain people, but it's not. And you have, and when you're talking about the immigration, there are two things about the immigration that are always funny to me. One, most of the people that are big on the immigration do not live in places where there's a ton of immigrants. And two, places like Florida, where there are a ton of immigrants, the people that are against the immigrants are immigrants. Like you're literally speaking with an accent, and you're talking about keeping the immigrants out of the country. So it's always just kind of interesting to see that. But I think the what do we do is kind of where we have you and Senator McCray is like we're asking the folks that are in the positions that are on the ground, grassroots working, to kind of tell us, like to Andrea's point, when our clients come to us and they're telling us like these things are very real and they're affecting me, we need to be able to offer something to them. And so we're asking you, like, what can we say? What are options that we can give our clients?
Well, there were a couple of points that you'd made earlier. As far as, say, for instance, what attracts, and just kind of backtracking a little bit, what I think makes many of our communities quote unquote conservative is I think the conservatism that exists in many of our communities is different from what these guys are trying to push now. We have decried the destruction of the Black nuclear family. We have wanted support for the Black nuclear family. And these guys want to impose the nuclear family. So again, this comes down to a difference between the original way that they couched their goals and their aims, the freedom to do such and such and so, to what they're now saying, which is a mandate that it must be like this, which essentially takes away the freedom to do anything else. And I don't think when we were expressing our quote unquote conservatism in terms of the desire to support traditional families, that our aim was to essentially force people to assume this type of a family structure and essentially attempt to invalidate everything else. So the freedom to versus the mandate to do it in this particular way, I think, is the main difference between our quote unquote conservatism and the conservatism that they're trying to push right now. And the other thing is that I think it's kind of ironic that the people who essentially are screaming the loudest or pushing this illegal immigration narrative are, of course, the descendants of the very first illegal immigrants in the country. And so they're here because their ancestors illegally came to this country. And not only did they illegally come to this country, but they essentially did the very thing that they're accusing South American and Central American immigrants who are basically leaving their countries because this country destroyed the economies back there in Honduras and Central America and South America. This country destroyed their economies. This country imposed right-wing dictatorships on their countries. And those people basically hauled ass out of the countries that they were in because they didn't want to get shot dead. They didn't want to get their families essentially terrorized in the streets. They left there. They didn't want they're even coming here. They're following their stuff. We take their stuff. I shouldn't say we. That's Fred Hampton Jr. used to say African people speak French in the wrong place. We say we too many times. The United States took the resources from those countries, brought them here, and then when the people from those countries follow the resources here, now we say they're the invaders. So there's a whole lot of flim-flam that goes on there. From my personal perspective, one of the things that I think we perhaps need to do is do a better job of actually reaching out to our communities on the ground where we are. I think a lot of us have gotten accustomed to the idea of being, I guess you might say, armchair activists. We'll go to a conference here and there and we'll say, I represent the African community in Baltimore. And then you go back to the African community in Baltimore and they don't know who we are. And so I think that's one of the things. I think it all is going to kind of start with how well we personally connect with our communities on the ground. This is the same complaint that a lot of us have had with apologies to Brother McCray, but this is the same complaint that a lot of us have with regard to a lot of our politicians, a lot of our representatives, from mayors to governors to delegates to senators to council people, that they say they speak for the community there, but the community there doesn't see them. They don't go to the community meetings. They don't ask the community what is on their list of concerns in order to truly fight for it where they are. And obviously not everyone is doing that, but there were enough people who were basically doing that for the community to lose faith in a lot of the aspects of the political process, which is why the voting numbers are as low as they are, and why people like the GOP and the Heritage Foundation are able to get away with stuff they're getting away with. So I think a lot of it is going to start with how well we actually reach out to our communities on the ground.
Andrea had another question.
Yes, I love where the discussion is going, and we also have to stop and think, man doesn't dictate nature. Nature dictates man,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the LGBT group, they have to be included. But what Project 47 and Project 2025 is proposal is they're not inclusive. They're trying to get rid of the affirmative care for gender, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when Trump talk about baby bonus women, which woman is he referring to? Because if from the get-go they have been pushing racist agenda against the Black community, he's going to want more Black babies to be born. I'm just asking a question. Baby bonuses to who? Which woman? The white woman or the Black woman?
You know the answer to that
Non-white
question.
woman. Yes, so we have to get real here, Black women have no care in the medical field. We have no care. So this agenda that they're pushing, I think we need to it seems as if the Republican Party are arming themselves against the general public. Mostly the Black community. They're arming themselves while we we don't have any arm against them. We don't have any arms. We have no say. We can't fight against them. So they're arming themselves totally with pushing this agenda against. Yes, that is what it is. This cannot be something that a fair and just society to live under. We could never live under a society that is pushing an agenda like this and call it fear or democracy. That's it. That's all I have to say. Just examine it and use critical thinking skills and look within these different plans that they have, and you will see that it's not inclusive of everyone or in the best benefit of non-white people. I give thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was a part of a question that I was going to ask our panelists, is to decide or decipher whether or not you think these initiatives, both Project 2025 and Agenda 47, are an assault to our democracy or not. Do you see it as it being a way to live in a democratic society, or would this be more autocracy? And I will first ask Senator McCray, and that will be to both of our panelists, but if we could start with Senator McCray.
And I'm also curious, if I can, if Senator McCray had, if he had a response to what we previously asked, if he could also include that as well. If that's okay. I'm not sure if he has anything.
Not much to add. I think that some of it is, when we talked about just radicalized, I think that you framed the question in reference to DEI. I think that our bodies, whether it's on the local, state, and federal level, have gotten more diverse. I think that as that diversity happens, we move in greater advantages for our folks. And what happens is other cultures feel under attack. So like, that's why we have the white supremacy conversation. That's why we have these folks that have normally been in charge, as I stated, traditionally white males. It gets more diverse. You have more women elected in office. You have more Black folks elected in office. You have more brown folks elected in office. And what happens is that their power then becomes strained. It's starting to get shared, and they feel under attack from that standpoint. And then I think that the question that you had just asked was, are we under assault in reference to Project 2025, Agenda 47? That's clear that like they have an agenda to move us backwards. They have an agenda. You talked about housing, you talked about education and things of that nature. Where I try to focus my time, because I think it's best spent, that is the things that I'm in control of. So I know that I'm in control of the decisions that I make, which is why I talked about leading by example. I know that there's a $60+ billion. I'm going to repeat that, $60+ billion on a state level. I'm one of 13 members. I get to leave my fingerprints in reference to that product that we come up with and make sure that it's reflective of our entire state versus some of our state. So I get Agenda 47. I just also say that the agenda has always been there. This is more publicized. This is more in front of us at this moment, but they've always clearly had some level of agenda, and it's our job to have our own agenda, short-term goals, long-term goals, but also focus on the things that we are in control of and making sure that we're helping and contributing to moving that needle forward.
Anyone else? Anyone else in our audience? Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's on you, Cliff.
Oh, okay. I just put on my extra set of eyes because I was pulling up a document that I had actually started about a week ago when we first started these Zoom discussions. And there were a few articles that I decided I was going to look up that were analyses of in particular, Agenda 47, because apparently that's specifically what Trump wants to do. 2025 looks more like, the Heritage Foundation's almost kind of like wish list, but Agenda 47 is apparently what Trump says he will do when he gets in. So I don't know that he won't try to do everything in 2025 also, but I don't know if he reads that much. But among the things that I was looking at in just this one particular article, what is Donald Trump's Agenda 47 and how will it impact different communities? And this is on Forbes magazine, and this is from August 10th, and it was updated August 11th. And there were just a few points that this particular author had mentioned. And of course, this author mentioned curbing U.S. immigration, mentioned ending gender affirming care, and those particular issues have their own areas of concern for us depending on where we are. But I think the two that would at least concern us no matter where we are, first of all, providing more police protections. So this here says Agenda 47 proposes that Republicans will restore safety in our neighborhoods by replenishing police departments, restoring common sense policing, and protecting officers from frivolous lawsuits, which for most people sounds reasonable, with Trump indicating that he wants to pour more investments into hiring, retaining, and training police officers, increasing viable liability protections for them. But it goes on to say Trump also wants to reinstitute stop and frisk. So now part of this thing is bringing back stop and frisk, bringing back broken windows policing, bringing back the Giuliani, and I did not mispronounce his name, the Giuliani instituted practice in New York City that led to untold numbers of cases of police brutality and abuse. He wants to bring that back on that level. He wants to, it says here, it disproportionately impacted Black and Latino communities. Reintroducing this policy could, according to The Atlantic, expose these communities to much greater police surveillance and enforcement. If Agenda 47 were to be implemented, it means the police would be provided with more power and protection, which could be detrimental to those on the receiving end of police brutality and injustice. So that's what this particular author, Janice Gassam-Asare, said about that particular plan. The other one that she specifically points out in this relatively short article is the acceleration of climate change. He's already gone on record as saying his energy plan is to drill, baby, drill. And if you're going to implement something that is going to further accelerate climate change, create more and more dangers in terms of more and more violent storms like what pretty much destroyed New Orleans in 2005, and which the powers that be then saw as an opportunity to impose a citywide gentrification scheme on the city. If you're going to have people who are in office who are going to propose environmental policies that exit the Paris Accords, basically allow them to drill and frack as much as they want, increase the temperature of the planet beyond where it already is, which is almost, according to almost every scientist, which these guys don't believe in anyway, is likely to accelerate climate change to the point where now you're going to have runaway climate change. All that's going to do is put more and more and more pressure on not only the community as a whole, but in particular, put more and more pressure on communities that are existing under some form of economic, health, or environmental threat, which largely is going to be us. So is Agenda 47 anti-democratic? I don't think there's even an argument that against the notion that, yeah, it is. I'm not sure if I answered your question on that, but I remember that the question coming up is it a threat to democracy? As far as I'm concerned, it is. Whenever you're going to destroy the people's ability to live sustainably and in peace, all that's going to do is create more and more tensions between people and the government, between one community and another community, and whoever is the community that's on the bottom is probably going to suffer the most.
Senator McCray, would you like to add to that?
No, I thought I did comment on it, but like I just want to keep reiterating, like Agenda 47, Project 2025 is right there in front of our faces. But these agendas have always existed, whether we're talking about redlining, where we're talking about FHA approval, where we're talking about jobs programming that discriminated and excluded Black folks from that standpoint, whether we're talking about transportation that only goes to some places in urban jurisdictions but don't go to adjacent counties. These types of agendas have always existed from that standpoint. This one's just more amplified and more out front from that standpoint. And I think that we should be mindful of this and always on guard and always working to make sure that we're moving our agenda for our folks.
So I want to say you've spoken a lot about us having an agenda, Senator McCray, and this is for you and Brother Cliff. Because on our last session, you kind of hinted to that too, Brother Cliff, us having an agenda. What is our agenda? Like, do we have an agenda? Like they've published theirs, they have it out there. Where can we find ours?
Well, I think part of the problem is that we've had a number of them. If you go back to Gary, Indiana, in 1972, you had the convention that was held in Chicago, Illinois, and you had what was at least touted at the time as a national Black political agenda. And I've got the PDF of that on my computer, and I can like send that out to people if they haven't seen it and they want to see it. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we started to do 2.5 years ago, when we started having meetings of a variety of Baltimore area Pan-African organizations. I'm not going to say all of the Baltimore area Pan-African organizations, because unfortunately we have a tendency to travel in cliques, which is something else that needs to stop. We need to stop having all these so-called Pan-African organizations only taking a little piece of the pan and deciding that they're going to associate with that. Yeah, I'm only going to go with the grease in this corner of the pan. I'm not going to take the entire pan. So we have to really put the whole pan in Pan-Africanism and bring all these different organizations together to not only bring what they see as the issues that are facing our community together in one place and say, okay, how can we take all of these agendas, the agenda of this organization or that organization or whatever, the revolutionary Pan-Africanists, the economic Pan-Africanists, the cultural nationalists, the political operators, the scientists, the lawyers, the educators, the prison activists, and the international actors, bring them all together in one place and say, can we come up with something that is common to all of us? And part of the problem is not only getting our community together on what that agenda is, but even getting the organizations to claim to have an agenda in one place to compare what it is that they have with each other. I consider 4 of the most dangerous words in at least Pan-African organizing to be I have the answer. You've got all these different organizations that are running around saying, I know what the problem is, but they're not listening to each other to see what do you have that maybe I can learn from. There's an old saying that I've seen a lot lately, and I believe it was attributed to Dr. John Henry Clark. It says, I only debate with my equals, all others I teach. Okay, well, that might have worked for Dr. Clark, but it doesn't work for most of us because, quite frankly, most of us aren't on a level that Dr. Clark was on. Now, if you say you only debate with your equals, all others you teach, then who do you learn from? If you only debate with or teach others, then who teaches you? Apparently, nobody teaches you. So if we're saying that, Dr. Clark could have said that because he was a giant. But the rest of us, we say that to me, that is an indication of arrogance on our part. So we need to drop our arrogance as quote unquote intellectuals, as activists, as quote unquote organizers, and be willing to sit together and do the work that will develop what that community agenda is. In 2017, one organization that I was a member of held a series of 5 Pan-African town halls in West Baltimore at a place called Arch Social Club. And at those 5 meetings, we didn't have a large crowd there, which is another problem. We didn't have a very small number of people came, but we invited as many people as we could reach to come to these meetings so that they could help us develop a Maryland Pan-African agenda. And the group that was there came up with a Maryland Pan-African agenda. And I said, okay, well, here's what we want to do. We want to take this agenda. We want to see what things we can put in place that will perhaps follow up on this agenda, which was a tough task already. But we also want to be able to be in a position where we can, every year or so, bring this agenda to the people and say, okay, what do we have right here? What do we have wrong here? What do we need to add? What do we need to take out? What do we need to tweak a little bit? And so that was really part of the idea, to do that work on the ground with our community and say, help us to build this agenda. We don't want to tell you what's going on. We want you to tell us. So I think a lot of the different agendas from Gary, Indiana, from the Black Left Unity Network's Freedom Manifesto to the Me and Man March, there are like 3 or 4 other agendas that I had pulled and was trying to get different organizations and activists to discuss and compare. A lot of them have certain things in common, certain core principles that they share with each other, and some of them have different specific things. You know, some of them are all into straight Black pride, and others are into making room for LGBTQ communities. So there are differences there. Some of them are perhaps more Islamic oriented, or more Christian oriented, or more African traditional spirituality oriented. So I think what our agenda is something that we still have to kind of do the work to finalize. I think we have examples of it and we have starting places, but too often what happens is the same thing that happened when you had a group of experts before Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. They actually went through a scenario. What would happen if a slow moving Category 3 hurricane hit New Orleans? They got all these first responders and everyone together, and they did all this work, and they came up with this plan, and they came up with what they thought the final results would be, which would be like, 10,000 people dead. But they came up with all this stuff, put it in a binder, put it in like a 3-inch thick binder. They stuck up on a shelf. Problem is, after they stuck it up on the shelf, nobody read it after that. Nobody consulted it ever again. They just ignored it. So when Hurricane Katrina came, they were cold cocked. So I think one of the things we need to do is we need to go back and look at some of those early agendas. Gary, Indiana, 1972, Freedom Manifesto, 2016, Maryland Agenda, 2017, and take a look at those agendas and put them side by side and say, okay, we like that. That still applies. That doesn't apply to us anymore. Let's combine those two together. And then maybe we can come up with something that we can point to. And we can say, this is a Black agenda. And then when average sister or brother on the street sees it and they say, oh, yeah, I get that. But until we do that, I think saying we have a single Black agenda is going to be hard to do. We just got to do the work to make it happen.
Anything to add to that, Brother Cory?
Just speaking from my East Baltimore standpoint, some of the things, and I've spoke about them at this point, but just to kind of reiterate, one of the things is I think ownership. We talked about Mr. Thorpe. We've done some work around housing and creating pots of money. And being able to see some of that move in the 4x4, the South Clifton Park, some of those neighborhoods that are a little bit tougher from that standpoint. Educational institutions, we're the fastest growing urban jurisdiction in the country in reference to building K through 12 new schools. So you'll see 23 to 28 new schools have went up over the past decade, but we're also focused on our high set aside money for the Build to Learn Act, which was about $400 or $500 million coming to Baltimore City to be able to do so with the high schools. I talked with you about like hours of operation from a health perspective, but also from a public safety perspective. And I just want to lean in and speak to some of our like building without anchor institutions that have the same alignment with us. Right there at the Lake Clifton High School, you'll see that Morgan has now acquired that property, but Dr. Wilson wants to do a convocation center. He wants to do alumni housing. And I do think that will be super productive, not just for the Chum community, but those communities that's adjacent to it, Dolly Park, 4x4, Bel Air, Edison, and South Clifton Park is what I was thinking about. So like when I think about the agenda in now little space we're moving our footprint. But I do think that that needs to be taken at like a national scale, thinking about what does ownership look like? What does our educational institutions look like? Transportation, food insecurity, public health, all have to be a part of that agenda on a national scale.
So we did have a question in the chat from Brother Gary, and he said, how do you see Project 25 and Agenda 47 impacting the mental health of marginalized communities? And in what ways might they pose a threat to our democracy by undermining social justice and equity efforts?
Okay, I'm going to take a look at that question again because I want to make sure I get everything.
While he's looking at it, I'm just going to lean in. Anytime you're straining the resources with under-resourced communities, you're always hurting them. The sister talked about education with the education agency. We talked about housing from HUD. So anytime you're straining resources on under-resourced, underserved communities already, you're already doing damage from those standpoints because they need it the most.
How do you see them impacting the mental health of marginalized communities, and in what ways might they pose a threat? I would say in every possible way. I mean, they if you're going to tell Baltimore City Police, who've already been reputed and by many of our activists as being among the more corrupt and brutal police departments in the country, and now you're going to take the clamps off of them further, I don't see how that can have anything other than a deleterious impact upon the mental state of a lot of our people, especially those of us who may be kind of like on the fringes, who are saying, hey, I'm just trying to get by in whatever way I can. I'm not hurting anybody. But then all of a sudden, here comes 5-0 rolling up on me. We've got enough people. I remember Sergeant DeLacy Davis, who was with the Orange, New Jersey Police Department. He founded Black Cops Against Police Brutality. And I met him a couple of times, and he's still, I think he has a website up now, and I guess he's got a doctoral degree somewhere or another. And I don't even know if he's still a police officer anymore. But he talked about how he had been himself harassed, assaulted, attacked. Attempts had been made on his life by his own fellow police officers who knew who he was. He was speaking out against police brutality. He was talking about just how rough it was for him as a police officer dealing with the brutality of his fellow cops. So you've got a police officer who's saying things like that. Then you've got somebody like Trump, who had, of course, Giuliani as one of his boys back in the day, talking about let's take the clamps off of him even more. I don't see how something like that could have anything but a deleterious effect upon not only a lot of our sisters and brothers who are out there in the inner city, on the street, on the corner, whatever, whether they're doing ill or not. I can just see that impacting the level of paranoia that we have, especially considering the way Trump was talking during his previous presidential campaign. He was saying if somebody's protesting, beat the hell out of them. When you've got somebody like that making those kinds of statements, and then he's releasing these documents saying he's going to take the clamps off of police, I don't see how that can have anything but a disastrous impact upon our mental state. And anybody who is at all concerned about climate change, now all of a sudden you're thinking these guys want to accelerate that even further. If you've got any kind of environmental education, any kind of environmental science education, I got a little bit of that, and you start seeing that these guys want to make matters even worse. Just in general, that's gonna, I can see that increasing instances of depression, and all the rest of you guys as clinical psychologists and psychiatrists and doctors and that sort of thing will understand a lot of those things better than I do. But I don't see how it cannot have a negative impact upon essentially how we as a community will continue, especially if you're looking at those of us who are pushing back against it. We fight against this and fight against this and fight against this, and then here they come back again. And after a while, we get like Marvin Gaye, makes me want to holler, throw up both my hands. And I've actually gone through that a couple of times myself, where I was almost ready to just say, okay, look, our enemies won't stop and we won't stand up on our hind legs and defend ourselves. So, so I guess I don't want to talk too much about that particular thing. So I'm going to let you go on ahead to the next question or the next comments.
Brother Curtis has a question, and then I got you, Andrea. So, Curtis, you had a question?
Yes, good evening. I'm trying to figure out how I make this statement into a question. First and foremost, let me greet our panelists. I have the pleasure of being in Senator McCray's district, the 45th. I live in Baltimore City, so I'm happy to see him on the panel, as well as I am the co-chairman of the co-trustee of the Art Social Club, in which Brother Cliff is a member. So for me, this is exciting because I'm a regional brother. So it's good to see these brothers on the panel. One of my clients, I do a men's group in Northeast Baltimore at the Temple of New African Thought, or the T-Not Wellness Center. And recently it came up that the Wu-Tang Clan was under investigation in a COINTELPRO type of probe, saying that this level of organization could be a threat to national security because these particular brothers moved in throughout the country and throughout the world, really propagating not overtly a Pan-African agenda, but really the fear of young Black men organizing. The GOP historically has targeted African American communities, specifically African American organizations that really tried to fight and stand up for the rights of us. So even though this was a music group, the government, the FBI had a dossier on them. What is and it was interesting because we talk about the impact on mental health. There's a fear that if the GOP is able to push some of this agenda, that the meetings like we have here and wherever we meet and get together will be not only infiltrated, but destabilized. It is very easy to say someone is paranoid when we don't have actual facts of this happening. It gets very hard to argue with young men that believe whenever they get together that there's a possibility of infiltration because of not just DEI or attack on diversity, but the attack on our ability to organize in organizations for the greater good of our people. What is the answer? And I think it piggybacks on a question before. When we talk about the overall mental health of Black people who feel uncomfortable, not only saying white supremacy, not only thinking about a Black agenda, that the fear, if we organize, we will be moved on and targeted by our own government. I don't know if that's the question. I don't know if that's me put it out there. What is the impact and fear that if we do organize and sit together and develop a Black agenda, that it will be looked at as offensive and an overt attack of white supremacy when we sit together, whether it's on this Zoom or we come together and speak about issues germane to us. Some of us are afraid to come on even the Zoom and be affiliated, let alone congregate. What is the fear and impact of people that say, I can't even go to Black spaces because I fear I will be targeted and maybe investigated? And this is not unheard of. We have in Washington, D.C., Trayvon White is being targeted, local councilman. We had our own Marilyn Mosby here in Baltimore City. When she spoke out against police brutality, she was unfairly and is currently unfairly targeted. We have the mayor of New York and his staff now being under attack. The fear that if we stand up for our people, we'll be a victim of not just white supremacy, but the government that we pay taxes to.
So that's open for either one of y'all to tackle.
Yep.
Right.
Brother Curtis Warren, I say that you're absolutely right. We see that basically you're talking about power. And anytime you're trying to shift the power dynamics, there's always something to pay for that. And I think that it's just not just the public sector. It's not just people like the state prosecutor, the DOJ, which you mentioned, but I also think of like just the right-wing agenda with our media and how they buy up newspapers, how they bought up our television, how you'll see a number of our Black elected officials under attack consistently, whether it's Fox 45 right here in Baltimore City. You see the ballot initiatives where they're trying to reduce the council size. So these things happen from that standpoint, but I also lean back in and say that we have a responsibility. All of those folks that were under attack, all those folks that were met these challenges, were just doing the basic fundamentals of what they were trying to do, of lift their respective community. What you talked about with Maryland, what you talked about with the DC council member, like they're trying to their best. And what happens is those power dynamics are always going to come. It's inevitable from that standpoint, whether it's public sector tools or the private sector tools.
Okay, it reminds what you just said, Brother Curtis, and good to see you, of course, and I'm definitely an admirer of the work that you've been doing through TNAT, through Arch Social Club, through all the other various avenues that you've been working in. There's an old saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean everybody isn't out to get you. So what you were saying kind of reminds me of that. Wu-Tang Clan, Public Enemy, Dead Prez, David Banner, Jasiri X, even Tupac, all these people to some degree or another, when they started speaking out on behalf of our community, they found themselves being targeted by the powers that be. And all that, of course, goes back to COINTELPRO and in the 1960s, 1970s. And really, it even goes back to similar tactics that were utilized in places like Chile. We're getting ready to hit the anniversary of September 11th. And everybody says, remember 9/11, 2001. I remember 9/11, 1973. September 11th, 1973, in the United States, after 2 failed attempts, finally succeeded in overthrowing and murdering President Salvador Allende of Chile. They did it by the imposition of a right-wing dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet. But before they accomplished all that, they had to implement a reign of terror. And when they implemented the reign of terror, it created a situation where the citizens of Chile were afraid to even come out of their doors, much less congregate together and gather as a community and try to chart a way forward for themselves. So to me, part of the strategy is to create this atmosphere where people are afraid to stand up, afraid to speak out. And I do see elements of that happening here in the United States, even though a lot of people would argue, well, this is not Chile, this is not some banana republic that's under a military dictatorship, so on and so on. At the same time, though, I remember back in 2000, 2001, when George W. Bush was running for president. And friends of mine said, oh, go ahead and put George W. Bush in. I don't care if you put him in. It's going to force us to organize. Once we see our enemy is in place, it's going to force us to come together and organize as a people. When George W. Bush got elected, most of those same people who said it'll force us to come together and organize as a people ran home and crawled under their beds. And a lot of the same people said a similar thing when Trump was running in 2016. Oh, go ahead and put Trump in place. It'll make us organize. Trump was made president. A lot of those people suddenly disappeared. And some of those same voices are saying the exact same thing today. And part of that is because even when the Democrat got elected, we always did something with regard to our bed. When the Democrat, our hero, got elected, we went home, crawled under the covers of our bed, and went to sleep safe in the knowledge that our hero had won. If the Republican won, we went home and crawled under the bed and hoped the storm would pass. In other words, despite the fact that there are those efforts by the powers that be to prevent us from coming together and organizing a people, I think the only way forward for us is to organize anyway and to do it anyway and to push back against what it is that they're trying to stop us from doing. They're trying to stop you from doing something. It seems to me that that's the very thing that you want to do. If they wanted you to keep on doing it, it can't be all that good for you if they're your enemy. So what we need to do is we need to actually stand up on our hind legs and really start to organize together. And I think the mistake that we made back in the 60s and 70s and so on is that we continued operating in our silos. We kept operating individually. Revolution is the only solution. It's the economy, stupid. If you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain. All these various kinds of my way or the highway kinds of statements. And it resulted in our organizations essentially working all by themselves. The Panthers didn't fail because their project was bad. Black Wall Street didn't fail because its economic agenda was wrong. Wilmington in 1897 didn't just get destroyed in 1898 because its political agenda was flawed. Those three efforts failed not because of a problem that they had with their plan. They failed because they were working alone. They didn't have anybody to guard their flank. Black Wall Street didn't have anybody ready to defend them from a military attack. Wilmington, 1897, didn't have anybody ready to defend them from terrorist attack in 1898. The Panthers didn't have a legal cadre ready to defend their dozens of leaders who were prosecuted all at the same time from coast to coast when the United States government went after them. We have not brought our different Pan-African organizations together to work on a cooperative, comprehensive, grand strategy that allows us to protect each other. And because we haven't been doing that, every time we try to do something, it's like punks jump up to get beat down. Every time we jump up, they do whack-a-mole on us and they smack us back down again. And then that creates a chilling effect on the next person who wants to come and do something. So I don't think the problem is that for instance, with Wu-Tang Clan standing up and basically speaking out for the people. I think the problem is Wu-Tang Clan ain't have enough friends to come and have their back when people came and attacked them. And I think that's something we have to build for ourselves. We can't just sit there and hope somebody's going to come and help us. We've got to forge those bonds ourselves between our different types of organizations so that when someone hits us someplace where we're weak, we can pick up the bat phone and say, hey, yo, man, they're coming after me here. And then those people, because we've helped them in the past, they'll come up and they'll help us. So I think that's important. And then one of the things that the Brother Curtis was even talking about in his introduction, okay, he's working with Arch Social Club, he's working with TNAT, and I know he's done stuff with Black Men Unifying Black Men, all these other different organizations. And I think a lot of that's part of the key too. Those of us who have connections with these different organizations, we need to find a way to pull them all together and get them talking to each other and working with each other.
You had a question, Andrea?
Yes, just a second, Mr. Kumbo. The Black organizations, we all have to come together and we have to remain organizing. We can't be fragmented. You see, the Black organizations have to become like NATO. You touch one, you touch all. That's the solution. So we have to remain organizing, because if Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, all these great people didn't keep doing what they're doing, we wouldn't have this freedom right now to discuss anything. Yes. So back to where the mental health, they're planning the Project 47 and Project 2025. They're planning to remove 47, planning to remove the protective factors from LGBTQ. We have Black clients who are LGBTQ. So when they remove those protective programs, what's going to become of them? Also, the healthcare. Most of our Black people or non-white people or the poorer class of people, they depend on Obamacare. So they're trying to privatize healthcare where less governance and privatization of the healthcare. So these things will affect people's mental health if these things, the poorer class people can't get access to these safety nets. And so, again, we have to become like NATO. You touch one, you touch all. But we can't give up. We can't let fear let us, hide behind the doors. We have to keep organizing. That's my take on everything. I give
Thank you, Andrea. You have given us a segue to next week, next Sunday, when we discuss some of the policies of Pillar 1, specifically Health and Human Services, and what those proposed policies, how they may impact, these marginalized communities, including LGBTQ community. As we come to a close, I want to again thank everyone for attending, but I wanted to pose one last question to our panelists, and we can start with Senator McCray, and then we'll go with Cliff. The question is, as we conclude today's panel discussion, what are the most important points that the audience should take away?
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity just to join this important discussion. Some of the things that I just want to hope that folks can take away, that I do believe that all politics are local. And I think that while the national is there, folks have their agenda. There's agendas being moved on us, whether it's local, state, and federal level. Tried to speak to some examples because I do know that people are apathetic about government. But when you think about Baltimore City, there's a $4+ billion budget. So those tax revenues that we all pay is bringing in $4+ billion. When you think about the state of Maryland, it's $60+ billion. When we think about the federal government and what they were talking about in reference to housing, education, a lot of times you'll find that the state government and local government are the pass-throughs. So while budgets are passed, while bills are passed, it's the implementation that's very important. So when you looked at Project 2025, they talked about placing people in the respective agencies. I would say that that's equally as important as we're talking about state and local, because it's the implementation. And once again, all politics is local. I'm going to put my email in the chat. If anybody ever want to be able to reach out to me, if it's ever assistance that I can give to someone of yourself or maybe someone that you may know, please never hesitate to reach out. But once again, I'm humbled by this conversation today and thankful to be able to join it.
Thank you, and hope you come back and join us again. Cliff?
Okay, and I'm also glad that Brother McCray was able to join us here today, because I think it's important to have that aspect, have people who are representatives of the community, and people who are not only representatives of the community, but who are also not hiding in their offices and are willing to come out and speak to the people. I think that's very important. As far as, I guess, the main takeaways that I'm thinking about is, well, first of all, if we've talked a little bit about governmental involvement. We actually have political lobby organizations here in Maryland, groups like Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. They've come out and they've put a lot of pressure on the Maryland state legislature with various issues. They've done analyses of the different candidates who have run for office. They've given grades to the different office holders in terms of how responsive they see them as being to the community. So I think part of it is to, in this larger, I call cooperative coalition, to make sure we have groups like that are involved, political activists that will be able to go to the halls of power and put pressure on them, and then deliver whatever the people's agenda is that we've come up with as a larger community. Take that agenda to the either Republicans or Democrats who are in charge and say, here's what the people want, and here's what we expect you to do about it. Damn it. So that's one of the things. The other one is with regard to a lot of the protections that have been taken away, as Sister Andrea had mentioned earlier. Some of that stuff is going to be stuff that I guess we'll have to find a way to, if they're going to take the funding away, we have to find a way to find funding of our own for it, which means we got to bring in the economics people, we got to bring in the business people, we got to bring in the folks who know how to raise money, how to bring those kind of funds in, so that we can start doing for self. So there's a little bit of do for self angle there, as far as what we will need to be willing to do in order to move ahead. And again, with what Brother McCray had said earlier, all politics is local. I would state it slightly differently, and it's an old cliche: think globally, act locally, because pretty much everything that happens to us here is impacted by decisions that are made either in Annapolis, or if you're in Maryland, or in Washington, D.C., or at the UN, or at the AU or whatever. They make a lot of these decisions and they impact state, national, and world policy, state, national, and world events that at some point or another are going to come down and hit us or trickle down. As somebody said, trickle down economics, how you look at it depends on who's being trickled on. And so eventually it gets trickled on to us. And what gets trickled onto us will determine how they decide that they're going to handle matters at the state, local, national, and international levels. So I would say we work where we are, but at the same time, we make sure that we are connected to other local efforts and recognize that those local efforts are all going to have some kind of an impact on what happens nationally or globally. Trump wants to drill, baby, drill. And if he does it as much as he wants, it's not just the United States that's going to feel the effects of climate change. As a matter of fact, poor countries in Africa are going to feel it first. They're going to feel it first. They're going to feel it most. So what we do or what they do on a local and national level impacts everybody. So yeah, act on a local level, but keep an eye on the fact that it's going to impact us on the national and international level. And then I guess the last thing that kind of hits me is we've actually talked a fair bit, though we haven't gotten too clinical about it, which is a good thing because then my eyes will glaze over. But we've talked a little bit about the impact on the mental health of our communities. And that's where I think all of you in the National Association of Black Counselors, I think your role is key because you're going to be in a position where you're likely to have to deal with some of the damage that a lot of our people are suffering. And the pressure is going to be put on you guys to say, okay, well, here's how we can help. So one of the things in this spokes of the wheel diagram that's my backdrop here, one of them is actually a little science thing. It's down at the bottom, but it's actually not just science, it's science, technology, and health. And that's one of the areas that I'll say, are comparatively wanting in. You can find revolutionary activists or people claim they're revolutionary activists everywhere. They claim they are. I don't know if they really are. You find people who are into culture and music and arts in a number of places. You'll find folks who claim one spiritual thing or another. So in a number of places, I know a few people who are prison activists. There are a few people who are educators. They're not all involved, but I know a few people who are educators. And I know a couple of people, including Baba David Murphy of the National Black Unity News, who's into media. But one of the areas where I think a lot of our organized efforts are suffering is in the area of science and health. And as far as I'm concerned, we saw that in terms of our community's response to COVID. We had a very jumbled and confused response to the COVID pandemic, and some of it was based on a little bit of knowledge and some of it was based on no knowledge at all. So I think it'll be an important thing to bring in the Black mental health community and the Black health community in general into this whole thing. So I'm really glad that NABC is holding these conversations, and hopefully that will again create the conditions where we can start bringing a wider variety of specialists and people who actually know what they're talking about into the organizing effort.
Thank you so much, Cliff, and appreciate you stepping in to serve as a panelist today. So next week, next Sunday, we are going to be discussing Project 2025, Pillar 1, which is on policy. So we look forward to seeing you next week, where we're going to delve more into the Department of Health and Human Services and have more of an in-depth discussion about mental illness and somatic health. All right. Thank you. And we'll see you next week. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Good evening, all.
All right. Thank you.